Hello everyone, I'm Asha Nayaswami, and you're quite used to seeing me in this 12 o'clock slot under this title. How do we call it? We give the name of whoever I'm talking to, and then we say, in conversation with Asha, something millennials. Oh my goodness, after all this time I can't even remember, but here we are and you know what we're doing. But today you'll notice that the filming is different, and you'll also notice that there's no millennial. And I don't really think by any stretch of the calendar you could put me into that category. We pushed a few people a few years, but I don't have any hope of doing it. The reason I'm here is to say that this really, truly, at least from my point of view, wonderful series of interviews has finally come to an end. Yesterday, I believe it was Narayani talking to us about her life with Swami, and that was the last interview that we have, and most likely the last one that I'll do. Now, it is not because there isn't a treasure trove of qualified young devotees, young from my perspective, young devotees with whom I could speak and speak gloriously and happily, probably for certainly to the end of the year and beyond. And in fact, if you'll notice this whole series, when we started, I did multiple interviews with the first 7 people I talked to. I'll explain that in a moment. And only single interviews with all the others, whereas most everyone I talked to, I could have talked to 3 or 4 or 5 more times, and it would have continued to be as interesting and as uplifting as it was. This whole project actually started in sort of a small way when the shelter in place, it came down upon us and we had to begin to scramble and think about how we were going to still communicate. We started broadcasting, which we've been doing, and I claimed the 9 a.m. California time slot, and I was going to have that be my slot. Then there was some discussion about whether or not I should appear every day and how I should share it and so on, and I found myself being intensely possessive of my 9 a.m. slot. I've been quite cooperative, but I refused to give it up because there are 24 hours a day, and we're working with a global continent, a global reach here, and so we can talk anytime at all. This isn't like our hour and a half in the evening in our physical temples. So then it occurred to me that because we have such an outstanding group of millennials, which is the best word I can think of now, that maybe it would help if I helped introduce them, and I was thinking really just of our Palo Alto family at the time. So we did a couple of interviews just at the 6-foot social distance, but it just didn't work very well. And the camera angle on me was really unflattering. And even though I try to be detached, I couldn't handle it. And we didn't want to get into a 3-camera. We didn't have it. It was too much. So we went to Zoom. So literally, I was interviewing people who were right in the house, but we were in 2 rooms on 2 computers. As soon as we went to Zoom, I realized, what am I thinking? Just geography. Geography just doesn't make any difference now. Now that we're on Zoom, we can be absolutely anywhere in the world. Well, the first 5 that I interviewed them 4 times each because I was really trying to present, I wanted our congregation to know the next generation of teachers and leaders that we have, which they knew, but it seemed like a good idea. But then, once we went out everywhere, all of a sudden, I just started running through all the colonies, just contacting everyone I knew. When I got to Europe, I had to ask who speaks English well enough to be able to talk to me. I had to get recommendations because I didn't know everybody personally, although I knew almost everybody personally. So the first thing I have to say is I know that I missed a lot of really great people. And it sort of grew of its own. I was first going just with the public figures, just the ones who were the best known, but there were just so many other wonderful souls that I wanted to speak to. And it began to be, for me, just so much fun. Just every day, it was like I really got to have this deep and intimate conversation about the most important thing to all of us, which is being on the spiritual path and being disciples of Master. And then with my friends from my own, where I live, community, we got to explore other ideas. But I saw something was beginning to happen. And at first, I have to say, it was really just happening to me. And then I began to get emails from many different people. Because those of us who are founding members of Ananda, I call it our tribe, the founding tribe. And it's partly age related, but it's like Swami was the first generation after Master. My founding tribe was the second generation. And then there is a third generation. For the most of Ananda, that's what I'm talking about. For the most part, they're millennials, but not all. Age is not the only definition. In the initial Palo Alto interviews, I spoke to James and Viveka Devi, and they're not technically millennials, but they're not technically part of my tribe either. They're basically part of that third generation, because it's the third generation of the project. When you start a new work, every generation has its characteristics. Swami was completely alone. He had to pull it out of the ether. He had to define everything. My generation, we pulled it up from the dirt. We pulled it just up from the ground. It wasn't there. And every little thing that we built we built it ourselves. I was very amused when we were doing the Finding Happiness movie. And there's a scene in the movie where we take the star of the movie, Juliet, Elizabeth Rahm is the actress, and we take her over in the film. We take her over and she goes and she gets a room at the Expanding Light. So we gave her the best room at the Expanding Light. From our point of view, it was and is luxury accommodations, luxury accommodations. And the director was saying to us, "Is this the best room that you have?" I said, "Well, look at it. It has like screens on the windows. It has a bedspread. It has paintings on the walls. It has indoor plumbing." All of this was like this. You have no idea. And he sort of just kind of kept looking at me like this. I mean, these are Hollywood people, and they travel fairly high on the food chain. So I actually went in and looked at the room. It's perfectly wonderful, but it is a little plain. And I really don't think it would qualify as a 5-star hotel, and it's not perhaps the accommodations that a movie star would usually stay in. So if you watch Finding Happiness, they added a line into it where Juliet goes in, kind of looks around like this, and says, "Well, I guess it won't hurt me to live like a monk for a week," is how she puts it. And the director insisted on putting that line in because he wanted to explain to people where they were and what was happening. We were utterly bewildered, and I thought about it. But then I said to Ted, he was the director, he was a friend, to Ted Nicolau, I said, "Ted, this was a bare piece of dirt." I said, "There was nothing here. And we built it stick by stick by stick by stick. No complaints. It was the greatest, most fun in the world. But when it got all the way up, that we were actually able to put a painting on the wall, it was just like unbelievable accomplishment. Of course, you're coming from Los Angeles, where somebody else built it a really long time ago, and it just looks completely different to you. And so that's what I mean about the different stages. What was a huge accomplishment for the second generation, which was me, it's like it's already there. Third generation of the project walks in, buildings are there. They don't know when they were built. They don't know when they were purchased. They don't understand the intense negotiations, the cliff-hanging project that it was. They see something already established, so their whole mindset goes in a different direction. And this is always the adventure of a new enterprise. The adventure of the new enterprise is when you're in the transition, and we've been in it now for a little while, the founder passes. That's 2013. That's when the first generation of Ananda, which is Swami as a singleton, even though Jyotish, Devi, Jaya, Sadhana Devi, a number of others, and I'm not going to start naming them all because there's so many of them, were there with him even from the beginning. But he was the first, and then they were there. Then Swami passed. And one of the remarkable things about Ananda was that Swami had trained us so well, had shared responsibility and authority so beautifully, and had brought Jyotish as his successor and Devi as his partner into that role so beautifully that we just didn't even hiccup. We just went just as smooth as could be. And I experienced it, and many people commented on how remarkable that was. Because in a spiritual organization, most spiritual organizations do not survive the death of the founder because it was all in his hands. But Swamiji, from the beginning, he gave responsibility as much as you would take, he would give it to you. Assuming you had minimal competency. And believe me, minimal was often the level of competency we were working with at times. But if you were willing, he was willing to support you in trying. And as a consequence, and he also set up Ananda to be extremely autonomous rather than a top-down leadership, so that it has always been a very exciting place for creative people to be. Because if you were willing to do the work, you could have the opportunity. So when Swamiji passed, already Jyotish and Devi were handling so much of Ananda, and so many leaders all over the globe were already standing in their own sense of responsibility. I will not for a moment minimize the loss of Swami's presence. As he himself put it, and it puts it in a beautifully understated way, it's not as much fun being on this planet now that he's gone. His constant reappearance from time to time just added an element of joy that we miss. But this is the way life is, and he is more accessible inwardly than ever. Far from actually separating from us, he's closer. It's just inward. It's different. You don't have his marvelous, radiant presence in the room in the way that we did, but such is the way of life. So then you have all of us who now have stepped in and have been stepping in for a long time. And very interestingly, not everyone by any means, but a great many of us of this founding generation, second generation after Swami, are very close in age, some even exactly the same year, but even within a few years, which means we all incarnated in a crowd. A few people who are part of that all know each other or are relatives by birth, not just or grew up together as children, bringing our friends. But mostly we were all over the world, although the founding generation largely came from America. I often wonder, we all came in together, I wonder if we'll all leave together. I wonder if there's going to come a time when there will just suddenly be this mass exit of my whole crowd, that will just be done. We'll really be done and we'll go. And I joke about it. There was a time at Ananda when we used to have birthday celebrations just once a month for astrological signs. I'm wondering if we'll have funerals. If we'll have the Leo funerals and the Cancer funerals, the Scorpio funerals. To me, this is something that we can speak about lightly. I mean, none of us have any idea when we're leaving, let me be honest. We have no idea. Is it 5 years? Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20? Who knows? Completely in God's hands. But then, of course, from the time that we were really pulling Ananda up from the dirt and even conceiving, the word Ananda meant Ananda village for the first 15 or 16 years. You never had to say Ananda village, you just had to say Ananda. Then suddenly there was Ananda Sacramento, then there was Ananda Ocean Song, then there was Ananda San Francisco, then there was Ananda Palo Alto. We had to actually train ourselves to say Ananda Sacramento, Ananda Village. Now all that's just normal, but these are all things that happened in the memory of my lifetime. Now there's Ananda India, there's Ananda Mumbai, there's Ananda Pune, there's Ananda Assisi, of course, and it just goes on and on and on, and will go on and on and on and on and on like that. This COVID pandemic, oddly enough, has caused this incredible explosion of Ananda because everybody on the planet has 24-hour access to the rest of the planet. So we're all taking advantage of it. But what I was coming to now is we're at this very interesting point where the world has really changed. And the communication delivery systems, the social context, the shared understandings, devotees are always the same. They're one of the shortest meetings in the history of Ananda, I believe. It was about 20 years ago, but there was a lone person among the influential voices within Ananda who was considerably younger than the rest of us. He wanted company. So he asked to have a meeting with Swami about how we could attract more young devotees. There was obviously something a little bit off with his energy because of how Swami responded. We were sitting outside, And he sort of called, the meeting was called to an order, and the man who called it said, I want to know, this is a meeting about how we can attract more young devotees. And Swami said, let's see, how did he say it exactly? He said, age itself is trivial. There's no such thing as a young devotee. There's just devotees. Shall we have tea? And that was it. That was all the energy he gave to it. Because he didn't even like the idea that just because your body is younger, you're a different kind of a devotee from an older person. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the third generation of the project. And we're talking about the passage of 50 years. I remember in the 80s when I told Swamiji the most popular class I was giving was about the chakras. Swami said, really? He said, you can give a popular class about the chakras? He said, Master hardly even used the word. He just called them the spiritual centers. I said, oh, sir, it's just common knowledge now. I mean, that's a small thing. But think about it, the reach of autobiography of a yogi, the pervasive understanding of Kriya, the popularization of meditation, what to speak of all of the communication delivery systems. So all of this comes to the fact that people sitting in my position are looking at a future that is not our future. You know, we're at the cresting edge. By no means am I about to hang up my microphone. I think I have a lot of words left in me before I do retire from this planet. But it's a very different world. And I have no attachment to my position. And I am pleased to say, speaking, I think, for my whole tribe, I have not seen anyone in my group, and I don't think I overstate this, who is the slightest bit interested in holding on to position or power or influence or any of the common things that happen. Naturally, we'd like to be useful. The idea of being put out to pasture is not necessarily attractive if you still have a little bit of friskiness in you. But holding on just for the sake of holding on, I don't see. But as I said to one of my millennial friends, it's only natural that we don't want to see our life's work destroyed. That would be a natural way to feel. Now, destroyed perhaps may be an exaggerated word, but in the context it wasn't. We would like to see the essence of Ananda maintained. The essence of Ananda is quite different than the specific ways it expresses. Swami himself trained us to realize that if the energy is right, the details will take care of themselves. So, over the course of the last 10 years or more, I've had the wonderful opportunity to get to know well or moderately well a great many people who are, well, now young enough to be my grandchildren, and are the sons, some of whom are the sons and daughters of people I knew before they were born. You know, that I knew them before they incarnated because I knew their parents, and I've watched them through childhood, and now we're peers. Because devotees are devotees, we're all the same. And I had some concerns, I have to say it. How could you not? You know, they have had a very different experience than we've had. The privilege of sitting at Swami's feet for hundreds of hours, you know, it's just an opportunity that no one can have. However, it absolutely must be true that Swamiji's spirit and Master through him, and Master in all his manifestations, it must be able to be vibrant and alive and well and creative and new in another generation, or else the whole thing is finished. It doesn't make any sense. It has to be there. But it's a little different. Of course it's a little different. I mean, if it was just the same, well, how could it possibly ever be just the same? It's ludicrous. But attunement, there's no such thing as young devotees. We're all devotees just the same. And when we're in the vibration, we're in the vibration. Swamiji, in talking about Master and the way Master expressed himself and how he made his way through the world. You know, Swamiji, of course, was exceedingly innovative compared to Self-Realization Fellowship. I mean, I don't want to put it exactly on those terms, but the way he felt to follow Master's ray was very different than the way they felt to follow Master's ray. They did not consider him necessarily to be a true representative, but he felt that he was a true representative, and we certainly feel that he is. Because it's not because he did everything, as he put it, it's not so much the question of what Master did as the question of what would Master do. And the master used the phrase, the blueprint, I've left the blueprint in the ether. And the interpretation that it has been subject to different interpretations. Swamiji interprets that as that it's an energy. It's a vibration of energy that exists in the ether, which is to say it exists, it is completely accessible by inner attunement. And he said that Master left the right vibration in the ether. So what it is that we must attune ourselves to is the right vibration. Now how that vibration expresses depends on who's expressing it. You know, what the channel is, what's appropriate for them. Swamiji said his leadership through our lifetime is that he in 30 more than 30 years of working to develop the Palo Alto community, I can definitely remember two times he gave us specific instructions. It's not that we never had conversation with him, but twice he gave us specific instructions. Beyond that, he really didn't. In fact, when we asked him, what should we do? He said, I don't know. He said, you're the one who's going to be on the scene. He said, after you've been there a while, why don't you tell me what you're going to do? He didn't mean tell me without consulting, but you tune into it and feel it. And then Swami said his way of leadership was to project ideas through the ether to us. And if we were trying to tune in to his way of doing things, and if the idea he projected resonated with our own way of doing things, we would receive it. And when we would receive it, it would begin to develop within us. And so by the time we expressed it, it would actually be ours. And countless times, in fact, continuously, through all the 30 plus years that I've been working in this atmosphere, we would just know what to do. And of course, it didn't take me long to figure out, because that was because he was sending us the instructions, but we were receiving them as a natural part of ourselves. And so that's where we are right now. You know, where there's a very dynamic group. And I was a little more concerned until I spent the last 3 months, 4 months, however been it's, we've conducted more than 70 sessions. I've conducted 70 sessions, because there's always someone with me, 70 sessions with more than 50 people, all over Ananda's world. And I think the future is in very, very good hands. I've been deeply impressed, just deeply impressed by the sincerity, the commitment, the humility, the creativity, the humor, sort of every quality that you would hold up as a fine Ananda quality. It's overflowing, you know, in a generation that's coming after. Someone wrote to me, it was actually an interesting question. Are you concerned, he said, about the future of Ananda? And I wrote back, someone I had interviewed wrote me. I wrote back and I said, admittedly, I was a little concerned before I started all these conversations. Now at the end, no, I'm not. I'm really not. It will be different. It has to be different. It's the third generation. I mean, the third generation is not the first and it's not the second. It also, the third generation has the interesting opportunity to deepen the attunement with Swamiji, which is essential to being in the right vibration for Ananda, is inward. And Swamiji's communication is different, just as our communication with Master was different than Swamiji's communication with Master. I had the interesting realization that Swamiji was with Master for 3.5 years, and Master passed before Swami was 26. Swami died just before he was 87. You can do the math. Like most of Swami's discipleship was with Master out of the body. Even though, and now let me just finish a thought. Even though when Swami was asked, and I never heard this question asked until like 2005, Shivani asked Swami, how did it feel when Master left his body? It was very interesting. I thought, wow, I've never asked that question or heard it asked. Swami became very grave, just very grave. And he said rather quietly to her, that's a very personal question. Fortunately, she's sturdy and she didn't consider that offensive. It was just, oh. And then he was silent for a pause, and then he said, it was heartbreaking. And again, I'd never thought about that. Except when I said to Swami, it won't be very much fun to be on this planet without you. Swami said, again, very seriously, I know, I've been through it. So there was the inner reality of Swamiji, of being a young man with all this anticipation, assuming he'd have a life with his guru. Sri Yukteswar lived for many, into a very old age. So Swami just assumed he would have a life with his guru, and suddenly he had a life of inner attunement with his guru. But the fascinating thing when I thought about it, in all of it, is that Swami never presented that as an obstacle to his discipleship. He never even hinted at it as an obstacle, and he never let the thought grow in any of our minds that it was an obstacle. I think that was exceedingly important, because he knew it wasn't. And so those who come after those of us who had this unique experience, which is now not available, it's just gone from the planet, is that it's not an obstacle. It's the destiny for which you were born. Why was I not born to know Master? Because I had a different destiny. Why was this group, not all of them, because they're a transition group. They're a transition. Some had very direct experience with Swamiji, some have never met him. But it's not an obstacle. The way Swamiji, going back to Master and the vibration in the ether, the way Swami described it, that Master responded to every opportunity that was in tune with the vibration he was trying to create. He did not have a set plan. He had a very clear idea of the vibration, of what Babaji wanted him to do. And if it was in tune with the vibration and an opportunity presented itself, he would respond to that opportunity. And that was how Swami trained us. We would respond to the opportunities that would further the cause of self-realization as God had given it to us to express. And this is the part that long after I and all my companions are gone from this planet, that I'll say you, whoever you is at that point, are going to have to work with. We have been given a very specific assignment. And we, there's many, many, many good things that could be done in this world. And this world is going to constantly present to us all of these good ideas that could be carried out. And all of them can be justified. But we have an assignment. We can't do everything. Focus is the secret of greatness. And our assignment is to be consistent with the vibration that has been given that is our responsibility to express. And it's a subtle reality, but it is the key to everything. It can look many different ways. When I wrote Light Bearer, which is 220,000 words, which is a lot of words about everything that I could, that Swami told me to put in the book, is the only way I can say it. I tried as much as possible to mention all these different possible initiatives that at one time or another Swami either responded to, attempted, or at least spoke of in a positive way. Because generations of people will need meaningful work, will need inspiring things to do. And all of these things Swamiji has sent out like huge light rays that are just vibrating in the ether, and people will pick them up. And they can vary greatly one from another, but they will all have in common that they are a consistent expression of the vibration of this ray of grace that we're responsible for. And the one quality that I was most gratified to see and was most eagerly looking for when I was talking to my 50-some friends was just simply this: a sense of responsibility, and I would also use the word an ambition. And I mean to be ambitious, not for myself, but for Master's sake. To feel responsible and to be ambitious, not passive, not just wait and see what happens, not low energy, but ambitious. I have responsibility for helping to share this magnificent ray into the world, and I'm having so much fun, and I look forward to having so much more fun. I was 22 years old when I met Swamiji. My life began at that point. I used to say I grew up at Ananda. people would sort of try to do the math and they couldn't quite make that work. But my life started. I had a very fine upbringing, no aspersions on the family that I grew up with, but I was born for this. And so my life started when I met Swami. And every day, even the worst days, and there were some awful days, really awful days, even the worst day was absolutely magnificent. What a privilege. That's who we are. We are so privileged. And I see, pushing forward after, coming up with great enthusiasm. A third generation. You can be 75 and be in the third generation if you've just arrived today, but to take it forward, to respond to every opportunity with the same joyful enthusiasm and commitment that Swamiji showed for all of us and is there in the ether wanting to inspire within us so that one can sit where I'm sitting now. And I'm going to go on for just a couple more minutes here. I was sitting recently with two friends of mine. My hair is brown. It never turned white. This is just the way God gave it to me, but I considered myself to be a white hair person. Both of my friends have turned white-haired. I knew them when they weren't white-haired. And I was just, oh dear. I was just sitting with the three of us. We were just sitting. I was with Helen and Gary, who have worked for decades to make our Ananda school in Palo Alto successful. But it could have been any of the people that have gone from young to old in this project. I said, look at us. I said, we came young. We took on impossible projects. We succeeded at some of them. We're still here. I said, no matter how you look at it, what a success this life has been. And that's, I pray for everyone that you can feel like that. That you can feel, whenever I came, I gave my all. I lived for God. I expect to live a lot longer. But it's a tremendous satisfaction that I don't have to. I didn't mean to get so emotional, but you can understand why I would. So my friends, and I speak to all 50 millennials that I spoke to and the hundreds more that I never got to talk to, but I would have enjoyed speaking to all of you. God bless you. I won't say thank you, because thank you is the wrong word, because there's nobody doing it for anybody. But aren't we lucky? And don't we have very, very good karma? And may God and Guru guide us all. Thank you.